What is crackling, everybody? Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by Number Fire. That is right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and NumberFire.com as we're getting you set for the Honda Classic and talking some PGA DFS for this week. My name is Jim Sotis. I am a senior writer and analyst for NumberFire.com, joined here as always by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for NumberFire. Brandon, PGA is finally back on the East Coast, which means I don't have to wait until like 9 o'clock at night to see any form of results. So I am ecstatic right now. How are you doing?
I'd be doing a little better if the field was more.
No. I served that up for you. You bet Patrick Reed last week. We talked to Patrick Reed on the podcast. I gave it to you on a platter for you to be like, I'm feeling a little richer. You know, I was trying to let you toot your own horn. And you just volleyball spiked it back in my face
Jim,
by complaining about the field, which has Brooks Koepka, Tommy Fleetwood, and Rickie Fowler, not to mention Luke List and Jason Kokrak, who are on an equal tier. How dare you?
Nobody wants to hear me talk about
I do. I don't care about them. This is not a podcast for the people. This is a podcast for the me. The me wanted you to brag about yourself, and you didn't.
Well, look, nobody wants to hear me talk about the fact that I had Patrick Reed this week. I hit Adam Scott last week. Nobody cares about any of that stuff.
Keep going. Let's do this. No, this is good. Keep going. Why'd you stop?
I had a bunch of top tens and stuff. I mean, it's been a good stretch.
Who's winning this week? So just so I can get this out of the way and not worry about it.
My first bet was Gary Woodland. I don't know how I feel about it, but I'm kind of selling myself on him. So I already bet Gary Woodland, and I'm sticking with it.
You picked the wrong 20-1 guy.
Justin Rose?
Yeah, he's going to win. Just so you're aware.
Okay.
I'm just telling you now. You've been right 2 weeks in a row, but hashtag regression. It's going to be Justin Rose this week.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a really tough field to bet because it's been either like a favorite to win here or a long shot. And I know we're not talking about betting, but this is just kind of one of those events, one of those fields where long shots can win, but I think like a balanced approach might be the way to go again this week.
Yeah, I would go balanced I'm fine having this conversation now. I would go balanced, but I hate all the mid-range plays. And by mid-range, I mean low 9,000s. I like the high 9,000s. I like the 10,000s. I like people below 8,000. The low 9,000 range is this black hole of despair from which I would love to eject myself at all points possible.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was talking about the field. I was being real, and you were saying, no, this is a great field, but...
No, it's a great field as long as you blast everyone between 95 and 9,000 from the earth. 89.
I mean, I'm fine if they're still just in the golf tournament. They don't have to be blasted into outer space. But, I mean, I think we're kind of on the same page, aside from just how extreme we are with our punishments.
You can not buy in if you don't want to, but I'll take the correct route. Lots of other stuff coming up this week here on the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. NBA back from the All-Star break, so the Daily ISO with Tom Vecchio is back as well. That goes up every weekday right away in the morning, breaking down the NBA DFS slate. NASCAR podcast coming tomorrow. We have an XFL podcast coming up on Thursday, breaking down week number 4. I believe I'm talking XFL, uncovering the spread today too, because what could go wrong with that? It's not a tilting sport at all. What could go wrong there? But to get all the DFS podcasts, make sure you are subscribed to the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, which you can find on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, the Google Play Store, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, anywhere you can find audio. Most likely it'll be hanging out there. And while you're there, please subscribe and make sure you rate and review the podcast where available as well, because that does help us out a ton. Let's take a look at the Honda Classic. It is at PGA National Resort and Spa. It is 7,125 yards. It is a par 70. There are about 140 golfers in the field, and there will be a cut after the first 2 rounds with the top 65 plus ties making it through. So less than half, obviously, to be making it through, which means that we no longer have the luxury of allowing Victor Perez to make up for his hideous Thursdays and Fridays, you got to do it on Thursday and Friday as well. And like I mentioned, we're back on the East Coast. So if you've gotten in the habit of procrastinating and filling out your lineups early morning Thursday, do not do that this time around. If you have dummy lineups, as I do, make sure those are edited on Wednesday night or very early Thursday. It's definitely never gone wrong before.
Yeah, or at the very least, just like take 5 seconds and build a dummy lineup that is decent. Like,
I have mine right now. It's the exact tier I hate because I'm like, I just don't want to deal with the salary cap, so I just plug in a bunch of like $95,000 dudes. They're all bad, so I should just let that roll because like I've come out so harshly against that tier. That tier is definitely going to have like 6 of the 7 spots, even though there are only 6 spots. There will be a 7th guy in the perfect lineup from that tier because of Magic.
Yeah, but it's still better than what I typically do, and I just reverse the salary and click the first $7,000 golfers, and then.
But Charles Howell III is minimum salary. He's not here, but like you can feel good about it. Like, oh, hey, Charles Howell III is a good golfer. The fact that he's not here is kind of irrelevant. I'll just plug him in.
Yeah, don't play Charles Howell III this week.
Hot take, buddy. What stats stick out to you as being important for PGA National Resort and Spa?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough course. It rates out as one of the hardest courses relative to par. So when I see that, I typically look for well-rounded golfers, and it kind of checks out in the stats that I found as well. So, I mean, the winning score is typically between 5 under and 13 under. And like that, to me, and this could be anecdotal, but it makes sense to me in my head, it typically favors better golfers because if the course is really easy, say there's an easy par 4 that everyone can birdie, you don't just automatically eagle a par 4 because you're better than the field. So if it's really hard to score a birdie on a hole, for example, and you're just better than the field, you're longer than the field, whatever it is, and you birdie it and everyone else is making par, that's more realistic than, again, just draining eagles when everyone else can still birdie it. So I think for me, I'm really going to elevate my lineup's floor by focusing on better golfers, which might sound obvious. All around golfers, good golfers, it sounds obvious, but that's not always the approach that we've had. And for the past 2 weeks now, this is kind of where I've been. Not a whole lot of fantasy scoring here. PGA National is ranked 37th in FanDuel points each of the past 2 calendar years. So it's looking more like avoiding bogeys, getting the birdies whenever they're there. But I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to wait strokes gained approach number 1. I'm going to wait strokes gained off the tee number 2. I'm factoring in strokes gained around the green. Putting on Bermuda is in there as well. And if you want a 5th or a traditional stat, greens in regulation. But I kind of want my golfers to do everything this week like we had last week, which is kind of what led us to Patrick Reed.
Well, it's also what led us to Adam Scott the week before. So the thought process of just targeting golfers who are undervalued, whether it be for betting or for DFS, has been a profitable one. And in theory, I would love to do that this week. It's just hard to find well-rounded golfers in this field. As far as the off-the-distance stuff, I tried to pin down either distance or accuracy or good drive rate. I couldn't. Distance did pop up as being slightly more important, but it wasn't relative to how important distance usually is. It did not stand out. So I just went with off the tee as well because there was nothing really there. And I think that lends itself to the well-rounded and just quote unquote better golfer strategy that you were discussing as well. So I think that made a lot of sense to me personally.
And that's a little scary, like you said, because I mean, you kind of be missing out on some of the best players here, the best golfers. But I think that there's a few clear values who will probably both be on. But I think it's a pretty clear necessity for me, especially at a tough course with the cut being what it is. I want to make sure I feel good about all 6 of my golfers.
Absolutely. And the target the best golfer strategy last year clearly worked out because Keith Mitchell won. And Keith Mitchell is like the best. So that made a lot of sense. What can we learn from last year's optimal lineup outside of use Keith Mitchell because he's awesome?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing with optimals, and I'll say this kind of a lot just as we go over them, if you find a golfer who's $8,200 and he wins and scores the most FanDuel points, like it's going to kind of skew the optimal. But other than Keith Mitchell, it was Rickie Fowler who was $11,900, Brooks Koepka at 11,400. Ryan Palmer was $9,200, Lucas Glover 97, and Wyndham Clark 87. These were just the top 6 scorers overall. 3 of them were 17% or more owned. The other 3, Keith Mitchell, Ryan Palmer, and Wyndham Clark, below 3%. So that doesn't say a whole lot to me. But what this kind of still says to me is that I want to make sure that my golfers either have win upside or some safety. Keith Mitchell was cheap, but Keith Mitchell kind of profiles as someone who legitimately can take over a tournament. It's not going to happen often. So if you're going to punt, kind of swing for upside. If you're not, and I'm probably not going to do this a lot, so I'm instead going to try to kind of maximize my lineup's cut odds or top 20 odds, whatever it is.
And Wyndham Clark is in that dummy lineup. So I think we're off to a good start here. Obviously, nothing else matters except for who was in the optimal last year. We are officially less than 2 months away from golf's first major, and FanDuel is rewarding fans who make the cut in the tournaments by giving them a chance to compete for their share of $15,000. Just finish in the top 50% of users in the weekly streak-eligible contest, and your make the cut streak continues. Best of all, if you haven't played yet, you don't need to worry about missing a week. Your streak stays alive until you fail to finish in the top 50%. For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. That will show you which event is the streak eligible one for that week. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's dive into which golfers have done well here in the past. And let's talk about a guy who was interesting last week at the W. Very cheap, and I thought that was very interesting, and it worked out very well. But Billy Horschel, Brandon, what do you see with him here?
Yeah, so this is kind of a weird event, like a weird course in terms of course form, because there aren't a ton of golfers who have a lot of good form. Like, for example, Tommy Fleetwood was 4th here 2 years ago. Justin Rose kind of pops if you dig way back, but he hasn't played here, or he's played here once over the past 6 years, was top 5 3 times before that. Lee Westwood also has some good finishes, but hasn't played here for 4 years. So Billy Horschel kind of stands out then. And it's probably, I mean, I guess the lack of form or reliable, consistent form is just kind of the field and the difficulty here. But even with some blemishes on his resume at this event, Billy Horschel's finished top 16 or better in 3 of the past 4 years. The other result in there was a missed cut. He does have 2 more missed cuts here before that, but if you kind of dig into the results, they've been drastically different for his 2 top 10s. He gained more than 10 strokes tee to green. Last year, when he finished 16th, he gained 9.4 strokes putting, lost 3.6 tee to green, which is crazy to think about. Despite the great overall finishes, it's kind of been a wild ride for Billy Horschel here. And we were on Billy Horschel for much of the late summer before stepping off, kind of cooled off roughly around the swing season. But he does have consecutive top 10 finishes at the Waste Management and then last week at the WGC Mexico. So does Horschel do enough for you at his price to stand out at all?
Not really. I think that it makes sense, and he is, I think, closer to being well-rounded than most guys in this field are going to be, and that itself is definitely valuable. However, I just think that, it's hard for me to fully get there. So, I don't know. I think that, I'd rather go a little bit higher and go to Justin Rose, or a little bit lower to someone like Sungjae Im, Daniel Berger, Byung-Hun An. I'd rather jump down to them rather than go Horschel. I was very in on Horschel last week and liked him a lot. I don't think I'm going to get there this week, though. What about for you?
Yeah, I don't necessarily love Horschel to the point where I'm going to make him a core play. Especially, I like Byung-Hun An as well. I like Sungjae Im this week. So Horschel might be one of those golfers who I don't dislike entirely, but I might just kind of rule out. He could wind up being a little popular just because of he's one of the few guys who has course form that looks good if you just look at the finishes. But again, he's been quite erratic. He's priced up now. So I think I might kind of just hop off. I love Billy Horschel as a golfer. Again, he's pretty well balanced, but he doesn't necessarily stand out as a core play to me, and I again, just probably not going to load up on too much Horschel with some other options around his price range.
I think that's where I'll wind up being as well. Now, one reason you may not wind up on Horschel is because you may want to jam in a couple of the big time studs. And I think that for this event, it really is three guys who stand out as being like the elite tier. That's Brooks Koepka, Tommy Fleetwood, and Rickie Fowler. We are going to talk about that group as a whole later on during the bookmaker section. Let's talk about Rickie Fowler here because Fowler doesn't win all that often. So the times where he does win are pretty noteworthy. One of those was here, and he almost did it again last year, so almost a couple of wins here. The actual win came back in 2017. He shot 66, 66, 65 to open things up. He was 12 under for the full event. He missed the cut in 2018, but bounced back last year with a second-place finish. He gained 7.8 strokes tee to green last year. We know he is a lights-out putter on Bermuda, so he putted well, but that's not a fluke. Based on the larger sample. So we have Fowler in this group of three. Again, I'm going to ask you about the group as a whole later on, but do you view Fowler as being in the same tier as Koepka and Fleetwood for this week? Because I do personally, which is not always the case. I think Brooks might be in a tier of his own, but Fowler, I think, and Fleetwood are pretty neck and neck to me. What about you?
I don't know what I'm doing with Brooks yet. We'll talk about him more later on.
You mean Brooks is hard to diagnose in a not as meaningful tournament?
Yeah. But for Fowler, he's not. Whatever I'm doing with Brooks, Fowler's not even on that tier to me. I like Tommy Fleetwood a lot. He's very consistent. Rickie Fowler seems very consistent, but he's gained strokes tee to green according to Fantasy National. So he's gained strokes tee to green, which is kind of really what you're looking for, in 2 of his past 6 measured events. That's not great. Mm-hmm. At the American Express, it was 1 stroke tee to green. At the Tournament of Champions, is 5.4. But I mean, his iron play, his approach numbers are never quite as good as we get from other expensive golfers. We're looking at a field where Rickie Fowler he stands out to most more casual users, I would think, because there's Brooks Koepka, who's going to draw a lot of attention. I don't envision many people flipping a coin will go with Tommy Fleetwood over Rickie Fowler. I could be wrong in that, but
Tommy Fleetwood had a stretch where he was consistently like the most popular golfer in every field, and it blew my mind every time. But I was in on him, but I was like tilted that he was always like super chalky.
But he was not $11,800.
He was like 10-6.
Which is very different.
Barely.
I'm just saying.
He was 10-6 in a major field.
I think that Fowler is someone who I would not bet Rickie Fowler. I think he's 12-1. Mm-hmm. I won't touch that. The peripheral numbers just aren't good enough. And I know that he won here, but I just don't see it. And of course, we all love Rickie, so it always is terrible not to back Rickie, but I'm not really there this week.
I think for me, I'm less concerned about the peripheral numbers because there is no one outside of Brian Harman, weirdly, of course, who checks every box this week. Everyone has blemishes. Fowler's blemishes are less concerning than some of the other guys' blemishes. And I think that that's why I am willing to give him consideration.
What's Tommy Fleetwood's blemish?
He's a bad Bermuda putter, and even his approach numbers are just kind of okay. The gap between him and Fowler is not that big.
All right.
I like Tommy Fleetwood too, and I'm not trying to bash him, but I don't think he's a tier above Rickie Fowler.
I do. That's all.
Okay. Well, you can be wrong. That's okay. You can also be wrong about Luke List because I am still having a hard time buying in here. I'm going to let you talk about him, though, because I can't figure this dude out. However, he does have some interesting history here. Didn't go so well last year, but what do you see with Luke List at 9-6?
Yeah, so we talked at the top of the show that if we want some cheaper golfers, they need some upside. List has that. Now, he's $9,600, so he's not like a punt play. So he's very interesting from that standpoint. But he has 2 top 10 finishes at PGA National over the past 4 years. He's gained at least 6.1 strokes tee to green in 3 of the past 4. It's very good for this price. He missed the cut a year ago when he lost 5 strokes putting over just the 2 rounds. He gained 5 strokes putting the year before to finish runner-up at PGA National. He has made 3 straight cuts, though, finishing between 25th and 36th. So it's not going to blow you away, but this is, again, a course where we've seen him do it. The form's kind of rounding back into viability after we've been way off of Luke List. So can we go back to the well with your boy Luke List this week?
I really don't think so yet. Like, if I'm going to go with a guy who can be very frustrating as a putter and has good ball striking numbers, I'm just going to go Jason Kokrak. Like, I'm okay with List's archetype here because, again, nobody is without blemishes. But if I'm going to go with that archetype, he's not even the best guy in that archetype in his salary tier. So I'd rather go, Joaquin Neiman is $500 more. Corey Connors is $300 more. Jason Kokrak is $9,700. So, like, there are guys who are objectively better golfers than Luke List who fit a similar archetype and I think are in the same salary tier. So I love Luke List, and I will eventually buy back into him, but I'm not going to do it when he's $9,600. I need him to be a lot cheaper for me to do that.
He's 9th in the field over the past 24 rounds in strokes gained tee to green.
That's good.
But he's 80th. He's 80th in total strokes gained.
He is 130th in Bermuda putting out of 139 golfers I think we had stats for, so that's good. I would, if I'm going to buy into a dude with really major concerns, I want them to be better at the other stuff, or I want them to be cheaper, and List doesn't fit in either of those. So I love Luke List. I will happily root for him, and if he does really well this week, I will be happy, despite the fact that, like, I'm not going to use him. But it's kind of like the same with you with, like, Tony Finau, where, like, even if you don't use him, like, yeah, you can still be happy for Tony Finau. I'll be happy for Luke List, even if I don't use him. I'm just not going to use him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to use him.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So let's talk about Lucas Glover then, because he's kind of trending the opposite direction of Luke List. He's in a slump. He hasn't had a top 35 finish since the Shriners back in the fall, and that's bad. This, though, is a course where he has had success in the past. The big one for Glover was last year. He finished 4th there. He gained 6.1 strokes tee to green. He was 17th in 2018. He was 21st in 2017. Good finishes there, and added another top 10 finish back in 2013. Now, we don't really care about that, but it does show he has a lot of course knowledge because he has been here 11 times. The problem is that Glover's coming off the WGC Mexico, where he lost 6 strokes on approach alone. I'm having a hard time buying into the course narrative here as a result, even with Glover being a lot cheaper than List at $9,100. Are you in a similar boat?
Yeah, I mean, so on this podcast, we go over some guys with interesting course history because sometimes it matters, but we very easily value current form over course form. And the current form for Glover is not enticing enough. Again, if I'm spending down, I need some upside. And the best way to find upside is not just to look at, like, finishing numbers, as to look at, tee to green numbers with, what if he putted better? But even with that, like, there's really nothing in the data for Glover for me to get back on. I haven't seen it. The approach was terrible last week, like you said. Gained strokes off the tee, but now I know that it can easily be kind of disrupted by the elevation at Chapultepec, but even before that, it hasn't really been there, and I'm just kind of frankly not interested at all in Glover.
Yeah, the one thing I would differ with is you were saying if you need to spend down, you need upside. I am okay with not having upside as long as their cut odds are disproportionate to their salary, and that's not the case for Lucas Glover, given which has happened. So there is a slight deviation, but the end result is still we're not touching Lucas Glover right now.
Yeah. So, you need upside or safety. He has neither.
All right, so let's move down to the current form section for the Honda Classic. Let's talk about Brooks Koepka because he is always an interesting cat when it comes to him in non-majors because he has openly said he doesn't really care. And that's slightly concerning. However, Brooks did do well here last year. The problem is the current form is pretty bad. So let's talk about Brooks Koepka here at 12,000 and then morph that into a discussion of the top tier of guys with Koepka, Fleetwood, and Fowler.
Yeah, so Brooks Koepka, $12,000, priciest golfer in the field. The betting favorite as well. That almost always means that he's going to be the most popular pick on FanDuel. Runner-up here a year ago. Really churned out strokes tee to green with a solid putter on top of it, but the current form is sparse at best and also iffy. Since finishing third at the Tour Championship in late August, which was quite a while ago at this point, Koepka was cut at the Shriners, which speaks to a lot about Brooks Koepka in non-majors. Missing the cut at the Shriners for someone as good as Koepka is concerning. Withdrew from the CJ Cup, 34th in Abu Dhabi, 17th at the Saudi International, and then 43rd at the Genesis. The tee to green play has been fine. It's not really elite right now. Koepka is one of the golfers, though, who you just kind of don't really care about the stats because we know what he can do, and it's not even high-end variance. It's high-end engagement. But he's 2 events away from the Players, so he could run away with this thing. He could just be out there trying things because some of the world's best golfers, especially someone like Koepka, will go play a high-profile tournament to try things, and that's wild to me. But I don't know how to handle Brooks just yet. What are your first thoughts on Koepka?
Well, I think that if you were to assume, which is an assumption we can't make, and we love making assumptions on this podcast because it's very beneficial for DFS. If you were to assume that Brooks Koepka were locked in for this event, he'd be a no-brainer. I think that's the way that I view it there. So you think about what are the odds that he's locked in? I don't know. But the other thing too is even looking at the events where he hasn't been locked in, and some of them being, post his knee injury, he's been okay. Past 50 rounds does include time before the knee injury. So with this caveat, it's worth noting that. But he's 8th in strokes gained off the tee, 8th in approach, 15th in Bermuda putting over the past 100 rounds. So the stats profile, despite including a lot of events where he probably didn't care, is still tremendous relative to this field. So when I look at Brooks Koepka locked in, he is multiple tiers above everybody else here, at least in my view. Brooks Koepka not locked in, I think that you have to differentiate a bit, and you can't go like we will have golfers where we go 70% exposure. Brooks Koepka cannot be that guy inherently, but I could see a situation where, at least among these top 3 guys, he'll be the guy used most often. So I have concerns. I think those concerns are very valid. However, I am still willing to gamble with Brooks and throw him out there despite those concerns because of how big the upside is if he decides to try even a little bit in this field. So what about for you?
Yeah, I mean, so to answer your question, if Koepka is locked and loaded, he's easily the number 1. It's really not even that close in this field. Again, we don't know that, but the thing for me is that, the Players is coming up. All these majors are coming up. He's coming off an injury. I don't think he necessarily needs to play in any events before he's ready to play. So I don't think the health is as big of a concern as it is just kind of the mental toughness, because it's almost scarier now to target Brooks Koepka before the majors as opposed to some sort of events in between 2 majors, because he got burnt out last year. We know that. He said as much, and he might just be trying to take it easy up until all these majors and the 5th major, the Players. So it's very, very, very hard to figure things out. And I think all we can do is assume, build some lineups based on those assumptions. Now, again, historically, the most popular golfer is the priciest golfer and the betting favorite, and he's both. So honestly, I might be underweight relative to the field this week on Koepka.
I think that's a fine strategy, and I would not fault you for doing that. I likely will be a bit overweight for sure, but I understand where you're coming from, and I don't think it's a bad strategy play. I think that if we're going anecdotal, one reason to potentially be intrigued by Brooks is that he hasn't golfed well, and the players is a really big check. And outside of trophies, we know the biggest motivator for Brooks Koepka is a really freaking big check. And I could see him trying to round himself back into form. That is so anecdotal that it makes my throat try to constrict itself to stop me from talking. However, I think that's kind of necessary for Brooks.
Yeah, I mean, that's the antithesis of what we try to do in this podcast. But it also, golf is probably more than any other sport, something where you have to kind of factor in the eye test and these anecdotes, and nobody exemplifies that better than Brooks Koepka at a non-major.
Absolutely. And he'll be an interesting guy to consider, but you have to kind of make that decision of, do you think Brooks is engaged or do you think he is not, before you fill out each lineup? I think that's the way to handle it there. Let's talk about Daniel Berger now, because eye test could play a factor here, because over the past 50 rounds, Berger, not great. He's just 77th in the field in approach, according to Fantasy National, which is really tough to swallow for a guy who is $10,600, but Berger's been playing really well since January 1st, so I think he's worth discussing. Berger has been to 4 events in 2020. 2 of those have resulted in top 10 finishes, and both of those came in his past 2 outings. He was 5th at the AT&T Pro-Am, but more important than the finishes, Berger has gained at least 2.4 strokes in approach in 3 of those 4 events. His off-the-tee numbers are still very good over the large sample. Berger's short game is solid, so the approach may be getting better. Everything else is kind of okay already. Are the recent gains enough for you to check out Berger at $10,600?
They are. There's a lot of green in his profile, whether it's kind of the past 50 rounds or just the recent events. But I think the biggest detractor for me from Daniel Berger is I like Ben On a lot this week.
Yeah.
I like Sungjae Im a lot this week. I like Eric Van Rooyen. I'm going to go back to our boy Joaquin Niemann. So in that price range, he does stand out kind of in a vacuum. But when I really hone in on which players I'm going to target most, I don't know if he's the one. And it's less to do with him and more to do with my my inclination for these other golfers.
Which is the exactly same thing I said about Horschel. So I think that argument makes a lot of sense, because this is a good tier. I agree. I like Sungjae and I like Byung-Hun An. I think that if you want to make an argument for Berger, which is one I'm comfortable making, it's that he is more well-rounded than An specifically, because An is a very bad putter. Sungjae struggles more around the green. Not a bad putter on Bermuda, though. So I think if I had to rank those 3, I'd go probably Sungjae first, followed by Berger, followed by An. But I like this tier enough where I am very comfortable using any of those 3. I just probably put An a little bit lower personally.
I think An's a coin flip between he and Im for me at the top.
And you put Berger third?
Yeah.
Fair.
It's close, and look, I'm just going to kind of do this, but if you start at the top and you say maybe Brooks doesn't have it this week, you say Tommy Fleetwood can be very good, but isn't always very good. If you're not necessarily sold on Rickie Fowler, Justin Rose has his concerns, then you're down to Gary Woodland. Louis Oosthuizen's very pricey. Victor Hovland just won. Billy Horschel. Then you get into this tier. I think it's pretty intriguing to kind of build lineups with nobody priced above 11,000. Seems very scary, but I don't think it's the worst idea.
I think that it's kind of what you said before too, where it either is a favorite or it's kind of chaos as far as winning this event. And the chaos theory lends itself well to an approach where you do kind of forego the top end. And I think the betting odds kind of reflect that too, because this is not a 160 golfer field, and yet there's no one shorter than 10-1. That's kind of rare, I guess. I don't know. The odds are just flatter than usual, which I think is noteworthy and impactful.
Yeah, they're flat. And I mean, if we had prime Brooks, he would be the one, but we don't know where he is. And so it's very flat. And one way to kind of maximize your win equity is possibly to bump down and soak up a lot of these extra guys. So
yeah,
it's an option.
I think that is accurate. Let's move to our next current form guy and talk about Tom Hoge, who we've actually discussed a couple of times now in the current form section, because he's been trending up for a bit. and he is back on the slate this week. He is $8,400. I like this range a lot. Hoge is a portion of why I like this tier. What do you see with him right now?
So he hasn't played for 2 weeks, but definitely still qualifies for good current form to me. Prior to that 2-week gap, he was 60th at Pebble Beach, so not great. But before that, things were looking up. 25th at the Waste Management, 5th at the Farmers, 6th at the American Express, 12th at the Sony to start 2020. And again, he's only $8,400. So if you get anything resembling like a top 20 from someone down here, you can't really hate it. Bermuda is Hoge's only positive putting surface, according to Fantasy National. His adjusted approach numbers, according to Data Golf, are quite good in 2020. So he kind of wasn't even initially on my radar. He's kind of been out of my mind for the past few weeks. But at $8,400, I like him, and I keep talking about building like safer lineups. But if you want that high end, I mean, we've seen long shot winners like not 50-1 winners here. So I'm not saying Tom Hoge's going to win, but there's also, you can make the case for that balanced lineup that I just talked about, or you can say, I'm going to play Brooks, I'm going to play Fleetwood, maybe Fowler, and like I don't know what you have left from there, but like you could really max things out if you're gonna bump down to this range. So what are your thoughts on Hoge?
Yeah, I think there are 3 golfers who are $8,500 or lower who have a very good case to be in DFS lineups this weekend. Those 3 guys are Sam Burns, our guy Cameron Tringale, and Tom Hoge. Those guys are all $8,500 or lower. Burns, you're kind of buying into very, very recent current form in order to get there, but good distance. Hoge, very good approach play, so kind of the opposite of Sam Burns. Tringale, decently well-rounded, and I like that. So I think there are reasons to buy into all of them, and I think that that's going to push me towards, it's going to allow me to try to avoid that nasty, nasty low 9,000 tier that I despise with every bone in my body, and I desperately want to do that. So Hoge, Tringale, Burns, all guys I am comfortable using, and guys I actively want to use because of the way the different tiers shape up for this event.
Yeah, there are cheaper plays. Now there's inherent risk in them, and that's kind of it sounds great to say, Keith Mitchell won last year at $8,200.
Right.
Wyndham Clark was 87. He made the optimal. Like, there are a lot of golfers down there, and you have to hit on the right ones. But if you do have good inclination about some of them, that works. And I'm just going to throw this out there, but if you play Brooks, Fleetwood, and Rickie, you have 3 golfers left. You have 81.67 per golfer. It's not great, but you can maybe make it work. And
I'm not doing that.
Yeah, I'm probably not either. Like I said,
you can do that.
I
will
said,
get a hard pass here.
Yeah, I'm building safe lineups. It's going to start with we'll talk about him more in the player picks, but I'm going safety over the stars and scrubs.
Alrighty, so let's move on to our final current form guy and discuss Matthew Nesmith. Nesmith earned a promotion from the Korn Ferry Tour last fall, and he did struggle out of the gate when he came back to the PGA Tour, but he showed an uptick recently, and I think that's worth discussing because Nesmith has now made 7 straight cuts. He has finished 50th or better each time. He has 4 top 20s in that span, including a 6th place finish last week. That was at the Puerto Rico Open. It was not at the WGC Mexico, so a weaker field, but 6th is not bad. What's interesting about Nesmith is that he's had a couple of pop weeks with his approach in that time. He gained 3 on approach at the RSM. He gained 5.4 at the American Express. And you were talking about finding upside in the lower range. If you can have a pop week with your approach, that's how you generate single week upside. Nesmith is $8,900. I don't think I will wind up here in my player pool just because I think that there are other guys around here who I like more. But Nesmith has my attention. So what is your read on him as of right now?
Yeah, he wasn't really anyone who I was considering playing. I don't necessarily know if I'm there yet. It's more to do with kind of preferring some other golfers in that range. We have Harold Varner, Vaughn Taylor, our boy Brian Harmon. So again, it's kind of one of those situations where it's less to do with him, more to do with I prefer other golfers. And I keep saying that a lot, but this is kind of one of those fields where it's really hard to sit back and say, like, I love this guy relative to everyone else. So I don't know. Maybe that doesn't make sense, but it makes sense to me.
So in this field, the way I'm seeing it is I have golfers I like by a decent amount in every salary tier. And I think that's going to lend itself to a very tight core this week. That can lead to very big issues in a hurry, but I think that's the way I want to play it. I think that it's less true at the top end. So I am less willing to just like commit to Koepka or Fleetwood, etc. But I'm very willing to commit to like my guys on the lower end. So I think we're going to be flipping where we were last week. Last week we were committing to our studs, filtering through value plays. This week I think I'm going to go heavier exposure on the value plays and then filter through the studs, just because I feel like there is less certainty for me on the top end.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. One thing that'll help me is I might just not have any Rickie Fowler, and so I can kind of focus in on it's Tommy Fleetwood this week for me. I'm just going to focus in on him, but I think that, I mean, this is one of those events where you can kind of go either way. It's a little more open than it was last week to me. Just keep in mind, it's a tough course, and the field's a little smaller than it can be. It's just under 140 golfers, but the tougher a course gets, the harder it is for me to trust and load up on value plays.
That's probably the right way to play it. It's more so just like my sentiment is stronger towards them, and I think that I should be reactive to that is the way that I'm viewing it. Let's take a look at what bookmakers are saying about this weekend's event. Brooks Koepka leads a group of 3 at the top of the odds boards this weekend at FanDuel Sportsbook. He's 11-1. Rickie Fowler and Tommy Fleetwood are both 12-1. Then it jumps down to Gary Woodland and Justin Rose at 20-1. Billy Horschel bounced back last week. He is 22-1. He is actually shortened. He was 27 initially, so decent little jump down there for Horschel. Louis Westhuizen and Victor Hovland are 27-1. There's a group of 3 at 29-1. Those guys are Byung-Hun An, Daniel Berger, and Sung J M, all guys we talked about before. And then Shane Lowry rounds up the top group. He is 31-1. We talked about that top 3 earlier, so let's dive down to the guys who are in the 20-1 range. So 20-1 to 29-1. Who stands out most to you in that second tier of golfers for this week?
It's going to be Gary Woodland. I already mentioned that I bet him, but he's got 3 top 12s in his past 5 starts. He's a really good ball striker. The only question mark is the around the green play, which is terrible. He's outside the top 100 in strokes gained around the green, but it's going to be Woodland for me, and it sounds like it's Justin Rose for you.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to the target good golfers argument, and the past couple events in the PGA Tour, Rose has not been a good golfer, and I think that is impactful because we do value current form here, but he was pretty good at the Saudi International. He was awesome over the fall and the summer, and if I am willing to lower the significance of 2 recent events, Justin Rose, to me, stands out a lot relative to the field, and I think that's why if we're going with the target good golfer strategy, Justin Rose fits that really well. I don't think he is a perfect pick by any means, and I think that I am concerned about the 2 recent events. However, when he's 11-4 in a field where there's a lot of ambiguity, I am okay going with Justin Rose there.
I probably won't have any. I think I'm going to kind of narrow down my focus on Tommy Fleetwood, Gary Woodland at the top. I mentioned a few golfers in that $10,000 range who I like, so I think I might go try to get 1 or 2 of Gary Woodland and Fleetwood, and then maybe 2 of the golfers in the $10,000 range to kind of elevate my floor, but still kind of have some win equity there. So I probably won't have any Rose.
Fleetwood's your guy for cash, right?
Yeah, I think it has to be.
I don't like cash gains for this event. I will say that outright.
It's scary. And the thing too is, like, I said it before, but like, this is a tough course.
Not a lot of guys. But also it's the top end of the field is difficult for me to diagnose, and that's where I get very skittish in cash games. So I would skew more towards tournaments this week personally, but I can see the argument for putting Fleetwood as your stud in a cash game very, very easily. I think that makes a lot of sense. Which golfers have lower salaries and have odds that stand out to you as of right now based on the odds at FanDuel Sportsbook?
So if we look at golfers below like $9,500, we have Kevin Streelman, Matthew Wolff, Charles Schwartzel, all 55 to 1. Lee Westwood, Keith Mitchell, 60 to 1. Lucas Glover, Johnny Vegas, Harold Varner, Sam Burns, Russell Henley, Matthew Nesmith, all 65. Patrick Rogers and Maverick McNeely are 70. Bud Colley, Russell Knox, Keegan Bradley, and Kurt Kitayama are 80. So kind of again, it's a flat kind of week in terms of the win odds, and that's what we get. So you have a lot of options. If one of your go-tos is to match win odds to salary, you have a lot of options, but at the same time, you have a lot of options because we don't know what's going to happen.
Correct. And it's important to keep that in mind. And I could see how the odds being what they are could lend itself to overconfidence in value plays. Says the guy who just said, I'm going to build my core around the value plays. I am acknowledging that. However, I'm still going to do it because my lineups, bro. Let's go. Let's do it. Weather for this weekend, it looks like rain is in the forecast overnight Wednesday, meaning things could be a little bit damp still for the first round Thursday. And winds will be elevated all day, too. They're never going to get below 10 miles per hour. That is high. On Friday, the winds start out around 10 miles per hour, then dip a bit below it around noon. In theory, this would give a leg up to those guys teeing off later, but they'll also have the wetter track on Thursday. Wind speeds will tickle 15 miles per hour on Saturday. They'll be around 10 miles per hour on Sunday. So overall, seems like the biggest takeaway here is that you might want to give a slight bump up to golfers who perform well in the wind. It is not enough where I am adding that to my sheet and factoring it in greatly, but I think it's a consideration. Is it enough for you, Brandon, to look at wind splits?
Maybe that's the tiebreaker this week.
Sure.
Maybe I dig back into that, but I really try not to look at that too much. I would rather get my top-down approach and kind of figure out who I like rather than play a golfer who just happens to have really good wind splits but terrible current form, for example. So I don't think it's bad to factor it in, but don't make it be the only thing you look at.
I would agree with that 100%. So let's finish up here with our player picks for the Honda Classic. Brandon, starting off with the studs, who are you zeroing in on there?
I'm going to go with Tommy Fleetwood just because he's my number one for like cash games, and I'm probably going to be more exposed to Tommy Fleetwood than Brooks Koepka or Rickie Fowler. I can probably say that pretty confidently. Fourth year in 2018, which was his only attempt at this course. Really strong form. He's got a win, 2 runners-up, an 11th and 18th over his past 5 starts. He's really good in all 3 tee to green areas for me. 6th off the tee, 36th in approach, which not elite, absolutely, but good enough for me. 18th around the green, and he's also got the best cut odds. He's been very, very consistent. So he's the best cut odds in my win simulations. And I'm just going to kind of plant my flag with Tommy Fleetwood.
I think that makes sense. I think that he and Fowler are in the same tier. So if I get a read that Fleetwood is going to, like kind of like you were saying, if Fleetwood is going to be way less popular, then I'm okay going to him. I don't think there's a big enough separation, but if I can't get a read, I might just go Fowler. I don't know. It's tough. And this is from someone who I don't remember the last time I used Rickie Fowler in DFS, to be fully honest. I'm usually not in on Fowler. I might be this weekend, though. I'm curious.
So Fowler's second in tags on fansharesports.com.
Mm-hmm.
He has 18 for context. Fleetwood has 12. Brooks has 11. So they're all top 6. There's going to be ownership here, but there's going to be someone who is a little bit more popular than the others, and it's probably going to be Fowler.
Which means let's see fewer people on Brooks, which lowers the risk around using Brooks. Let's talk about Brooks. This is my first player pick here. There is always a chance he just decides to not show up, and he has struggled since that knee injury, but it's still tough for me to pass him up. One of the rough events for Brooks was the Genesis. He finished 43rd there, but even there, he gained 1.7 strokes off the tee. He gained 3 on approach, but his short game was just terrible. That's in addition to finishing 17th at the Saudi International. So it's not as if he's been abysmal since coming back. He just hasn't been Brooks. Bermuda is Brooks' best putting surface, and you can get an advantage here with some distance. Finished second year last year. I'm okay taking the risk at 12,000. I think I am committing to being overweight on Brooks. Sounds like I want to do a ton to do that, but I think if I had to set an exposure level to Brooks right now, I'd be at about 50%. So lower than I usually commit to for a top stud, but still enough where if he bombs, it's going to hurt. So I think that's where I'm going to settle.
Yeah, I mean, he's just kind of outside the realm of like being
Logic.
objective. Logic, like you can't really be objective here because there's no way to be objective with Brooks this week.
Just not how it goes. Who else do you have in the upper range?
So because I'm kind of preaching a balanced build, especially at like this tougher course, I'm not going to go with Gary Woodland. Instead, I'm going to go with Byung-Hoon Ahn at $10,500. He's 29-1 to win, so not terrible. He's a great all-around player aside from putting, which we all know. He knows that as well. But he's finished 5th and 36th here the past 2 years. 3 top 30s in his past 5 starts. Leads the field in strokes gained around the green. He typically is up there in around the green performance, and that's usually a very small percentage of scoring, but at a difficult course and specifically at PGA National, around the green play matters, getting out of trouble matters, saving pars matters. So we're not going to have a ton of fantasy points, and that is kind of another reason why I'm more okay with Byung-Hoon Ahn if he doesn't make all the putts. He just has to make the cut.
To back up your point about how good his around the green play is, putting matters a lot for scrambling. If you're using scrambling as a statistic, despite being a terrible putter, he's still third in this field in scrambling the past 50 rounds, which is nuts. Daniel Berger is second, which is part of the reason why I prefer Berger, because he has a better putter too, and it's kind of double counting there. But I'll go Berger over Ahn. I have Sung Jae also higher, so I wound up putting Ahn third, but that is not an indictment of Ahn. I just happen to like those guys a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, like I said,
it's tough.
I'm fine with all three of them, and then there's Joaquin Niemann and Eric Van Rooyen who are above 10,000. So it's a very interesting range.
It definitely is. I want to go a little bit higher because I, again, hate
You hate guys who make the cut.
I hate the low 9,000 range because it's abysmal. So let's go Justin Rose because, again, he struggled in the 2 PGA Tour events since January 1st. He lost strokes and approach in both, and that's concerning. But it's hard to tell whether the 2 poor events should erase what he did before that stretch, because the week before missing the cut at the Farmers Insurance, Rose finished second at the Singapore Open, then flew from Singapore, went to the Farmers, missed the cut there. At the time, in the Singapore Open, that was his 18th consecutive made cut. It was his 4th top 5 and 6th top 10 in that time. So I think if we're going with the target good golfers approach, Justin Rose fits it really well. I am acknowledging the fact that the approach play was bad in those 2 events, but it was good right before that. He is a good long form guy. He is decently well balanced. I am willing to gamble on that with Justin Rose at 11-4. So I'm going to go there. I don't know how it's going to play out. It could go poorly, but I think that if we're taking the target good golfers mindset, he fits that very well.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can kind of say whatever you want about Justin Rose, but he's never going to be like a completely terrible DFS play because he is just very good long form, and he's going to be relatively under-owned based on the early fan share tags. I don't think people really care for Justin Rose to go out of their way to play him. The form's been kind of whatever you want it to be, so I think you can get some leverage here with Justin Rose this week. I'm not going to use him, like I said, but I don't hate it.
Okay, let's move down to the middle tier. Who do you have there?
So I'm going to cheat again. I went with Patrick Reed here last week, I think, at 10,100. I'm going to go with another golfer at that price, and it's Joaquin Niemann, and that's why I kind of went with Ben An as my second high-price golfer. And my favorite lineup that I've toyed around with has 4 golfers above 10,000, so Niemann fits that, and I'm just going to talk about him here. 59th at PGA National a year ago with a missed cut, 49th and 57th in his past 3 starts, so that's bad. But again, if we're talking longer-term form, I know that Niemann still doesn't have long-term form, but over the past year, he's still quite good relative to this field. I think that there's legitimate value in having a balanced build, and that's where I'm going this week. I'm just going to make that decision here. And the putting's coming around, which helps a ton because he's such a good ball striker that if he can putt decently well, he's gonna pay off more often than he doesn't. So Neiman at $10,100, 45 to 1 to win. He's someone who I'm going out of my way to target.
I think that makes sense. And I think that he kind of is the way we discussed before. We're like, if I'm going to go with someone with imperfections, I'm going to go with someone who has like really good strengths, and Neiman fits that. As does Jason Kokrak. So let's talk about Jason Kokrak here. He is my first mid-range play because Bermuda is easily Jason Kokrak's least bad surface, and that's valuable given how good he is in the other aspects of his game. He is 7th in the field in strokes gained off the tee the past 50 rounds. He is also 28th in approach. He is 49th in scrambling, and Kokrak was able to show some competence on these greens last year with a 9th place finish, and he's been not great recently. The current form is mixed at best. A lot of missed cuts in there, but if we're going to get him back on Bermuda, that could allow him to claw back a bit. So I like Jason Kokrak at $9,700. He is my favorite guy in this tier, and that's a little bit scary to buy back in on Kokrak, but we'll see how it goes.
We have a rule here, Jim.
I know he's not 93. You're right.
He's not.
You're right. However,
relative adjusting for this field is 97 is basically 93. So I don't hate it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I
think that's a fair concern to point out, though. He's not 93 exactly. I get it.
Which is, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we need from Kokrak. But the biggest question mark for him is just the short game. And 97 is a little high to have like a concern about a golfer, but
everyone else in that range has a concern too. There's a lot of red in that tier. So yeah, I'll go with the green. That's Kokrak. Neiman fits that too. And Corey Connors potentially as well. Who else do you like in this mid-range? That was a very, very blunt face for Corey Connors. I get it. You're good.
Maybe nobody else I like here. I mean, I
hate this range too. Again, I hate it. It's terrible.
So I mean, look, I want to build a balanced lineup, but I don't feel that there's a lot of difference between like 94 and some guys at 84, and that is very key, and that helps me a lot. But if I have to pick a golfer in this range, maybe Russell Knox. He's $9,400. Main problem is distance for him. You don't have to bomb it here. It always helps to have that in your arsenal, but he's 26th if you look at like adjusted FanDuel scoring since the start of 2018, which is not bad for someone at $9,400. Kind of a balanced profile for him. I don't love it. I'm not even going to use a lot of Russell Knox, but I don't think that it's a bad play to use Knox if you have $9,400 left.
I'm pretty sure you're just agreeing with me that this tier is atrocious, right?
Yeah, I don't care for it.
Okay, good. Well, let's talk about Kevin Streelman because this is a terrible range, so I might as well go for a guy who, again, is good at one thing. And for Streelman, that is ball striking. He is 32nd in the field off the tee. He's 9th in approach. And we know the other imperfections, but everybody in the low 9,000s has major warts. I am just more okay with Streelman's than what other people have. I think he is very risky for cash games due to a lot of missed cut juice, which may mean that my lineup construction for cash games is very different than it usually is because this is a good range for cash games. Usually it is not this week. I like him for tourneys. I am trying to avoid this tier though in every format. Right now my cash game lineup does not include anyone between, I think it's like 9,700 and 88, which is very weird for me. But I think this week it's just it's necessary. Do you have any thoughts on Streelman? He was kind of the sacrificial lamb there.
Yeah, I mean, like, despite all the missed cuts, he's still kind of somewhat safe because he's like a decent long-term form golfer.
Yeah.
I don't love him. I'm with you. Like, we're both kind of just out on this range in general.
It's terrible, honestly.
I
generally love this range. This is the Kokrak. This is the Coke zone.
This is like the heat check.
Love a good Coke zone. Just roll with it.
That's what we're gonna start calling. Instead of the
Coke
mid
Zone.
tier,
Yeah.
instead of
Coke
the
Zone.
mid tier guys, we're gonna call them the Coke Zone.
Coke Zone. What could go wrong?
Let's just move on.
Let's get out of the Coke Zone. Eject ourselves from the Coke Zone. Who do you like in the value play section?
So two golfers at 9,000 I actually both like. But the first one's Harold Varner, right at 9,000. Pretty balanced overall. 42nd off the tee, 41st in approach, 33rd around the green over the past 50 rounds. None of those are amazing, but none of those are terrible. He's quite a good discount here. Flirted with the win at the Genesis. He's going to have to overcome the botched 3-wood, but he's also going to have to overcome the fact that he hasn't finished top 50 here at this event over the past 4 years. But the recent form's quite good for the price. And I think there's some ostensible safety with Harold Varner right now.
Our video producer, Calvin Theobald, asked me, is the Coke Zone segment sponsored by Coca-Cola or the 1980s? I'm going to say yes. We're going to go with yes. The 80s was a very weird decade, so I don't want to give like pop culturally, it's very strange, and I don't like any like music from the 80s or anything. But like, I'm just gonna say yes. Brought to you by both.
And Jim hates the 80s.
Yeah, why not? So you were saying one of the allures of Harold Varner III is that he's well-rounded. I think that Brian Harman is the most well-rounded golfer in this field, and he is $8,800. So clearly my brain is warped. But let's ride with Brian Harman here at $8,800 because we know he's not going to win this event, and I am okay with that, but I'm not asking him to. He's $8,800 in a weird field, and he is super well-rounded. He is top 30 in all 4 of my key stats for this week, and he is the only golfer in the field who can say that. Again, he is $8,800. This probably means my process is stupid, but I don't care. Harman has made 11 of his past 12 cuts. He has 5 top 20s in that time. I know I'm not going to get a huge outing here, but I can get a good shot at him playing 4 rounds, and there should be some birdies mixed in, and that's more than what we'll get out of most sub 9,000 guys. I would say that Brian Harman has a good chance to be my highest exposure golfer in this entire field, and I'm okay with that, even though it's very counterintuitive to how we usually play things. What are your thoughts on Brian Harman?
Yeah, so FanDuel scoring birdies, they're not going to be in abundance this week. That helps me get to Brian Harman. He's going to be able to kind of avoid bogeys, make some pars, make some birdies here and there. He's going to play just slightly. I mean, if we can trust what he's been doing, he's going to play slightly above the field average, and that's good enough for me at $8,800. So, I mean, top 30 is in the cards for sure. I think that he can linger with that profile, and I think that is valuable. So I think the upside is a little bit higher than you might think, but Harman, I think hands down, our number 1 play for the week, price considered.
Ooh, I like it. We're both in here. This is good. Brian Harman, always lurking. Who else do you have in the value range for this week?
So like I said, I think that there's value in balance, and we talked about a few cheaper golfers, but I think Vaughn Taylor at 9,000 is also someone to consider. He's a really balanced all-around golfer for the salary. The main issue for him is his off the tee numbers, but that's just mostly because he's not long off the tee. He's very accurate. You don't have to be long off the tee this week. Again, it helps, but it's whatever. He's 20th in Bermuda putting over a 100-round sample. Perhaps the best long-term form of any golfer priced at 9,000 or below. So I don't have any issues kind of bottoming out my lineups with Harman, Taylor, Harold Varner, and just really kind of maximizing or avoiding punting too much.
Between Varner and Taylor, who do you prefer?
Look, we love Vaughn Taylor on this podcast, but I just have something for Harold Varner, and I'm just going to go with Harold Varner.
The word I'd use for Harold Varner is juice. He's got more juice. I think that's valuable. So I'd go with HV3-2, but Harman over both for me.
HV3-2. I like that.
Ooh, I like it. All right.
I don't know what it means, but I like it.
The reason that I was not on the Vaughn Taylor or HV3 plays is because I do like that mid 8,000 range, which is not usually the case. And one of the guys who makes me like that tier is Sam Burns. He is just 102nd in approach over the past 50 rounds, which is actively bad. But the recent form is good enough for me to get here at $8,500 because over the past 4 events, Burns has gained at least 1.6 strokes in approach each time. He gained 2.7 at the American Express. He gained 3.9 at the Waste Management, even though he did miss the cut there. He was just awful elsewhere, but really good on the approach. And he's actually 16th in strokes gained off the tee. He is 5th in Bermuda putting. So if the approach play comes around, Burns will likely hit a pretty big surge. And I hate the middle tier. I want to go a bit more weird with my approach this week and trying to avoid that middle tier. Sam Burns fits that really well and brings upside at the same time. So I like Sam Burns a decent amount, 85. I can't feel as good about him as Brian Harman. I think that where I'm going to build around Harman, I am going to filter through guys like Sam Burns, like Cameron Tringale, like Tom Hoge, keep them as more rotational guys, build around Harman. But is Burns someone you would consider at $8,500?
I don't hate him. I don't love him. But if you're going to buy into a small sample, you want it to be from younger golfers. That's what the data shows. He's 23, so that checks out there. I mean, I don't hate him. I just wouldn't put him really near the top. Especially, we didn't really talk about Cameron Tringale. He's $8,300. We both love Brian Harman. Doc Redman's $7,900. Rory Sabatini's been a long time heat check recommendation. He's 86. Hoagie's 84.
Sabatini's pretty well rounded too. He fits that bucket as well.
Yeah. So again, it's one of those like I don't hate Sam Burns. Just can't play everyone. So he's kind of off my list there. But maybe I like the cheaper guys a little more. And because we hate the low 9,000s, I'm just kind of treating this as like the low 9,000s this week.
Yeah, we sat, like, I looked at the sheet, and I was like, all right, so I've got Kokrak at 9.7. I should pick a lower 9,000 guy to pick. And I'm like, end me. Like, just let me retire, quit this job so I don't have to discuss anyone. I wound up on Strelman, but, like, and I think that we need to account for that in roster construction. I'm just going to avoid it. So,
yeah, I think that there are some golfers down here who are cheaper than they should be. And
Sabatini fits that, I think.
I mean, Vaughn Taylor's probably a little too cheap. I know he's having ups and downs, but I mean, it's just one of those weeks where like guys are, because it's so flat, some of these golfers are just underpriced.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Let's finish up here with the win picks. Of my lineups that I filled out last week, my bobble hat lineup was my worst, which is ideal because it is a head-to-head. Cool. I had a good week last week. My bobble hat lineup was pure trash. So you are picking first again. I'm going to keep everyone in the field. You can pick anybody you want. And then you can pick anybody, let's say 50 to 1 or longer to win. Who are you picking first for this week?
50 to 1 or longer?
Correct.
Looks pretty bad.
I considered it 60, and then I was like, nope.
Yeah, so 50 to 1 or longer. Well, I'll just, for the sake of time, I'll just go with Tommy Fleetwood.
Okay, then I'm going to go Kokrak.
Yeah, that's who I should have probably taken.
I'll go Brooks on the top end because go big or go home. It's like the old Joe Flacco thing. F it, I'm going deep. F it, we're going deep with Brooks.
Well, F it, I'm going deep with Brian Harman.
Yes, that's usually my pick. I picked him like 18 times. This is awesome. Okay, so
little bit of an error by not being quite as prepared. Could have taken Jason Kokrak, but I'm all right with it.
No. If you prepare for the segment, you're doing it wrong. I didn't even put this thing on the rundown. So if we forget it, we forget it. If he dies, he dies. Like, that's how much we care about this segment. We're just, whatever. I got Brooks and Kokrak. You've got Fleetwood and Harman. We'll see how this goes. Brooks could easily get me missed cut, which counts as 100 in our averages. But hey, go big or go home. Any final thoughts for you, Brandon, on the Honda Classic?
Probably go a little heavier on tournaments this week because it's going to be tough to make the cut. It's pretty flat, and so outside of the studs, there's going to be it's going to be a little bit hard to get 6 out of 6. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I always recommend more tournaments anyway.
Yep, that's probably the way to play it. And given the way my bobble hat went last week, I probably should just not do cash games anyway. That is all that we have for today here on the PGA side. As mentioned, we do have a NASCAR podcast coming tomorrow, XFL podcast Thursday, and of course, a Daily ISO with Tom Vecchio every weekday. So make sure you are subscribed to the Number Fire Daily Fantasy podcast feed on the podcast format of your choosing. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
Matt Gadula, 13 GDULA 13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for keeping us on the air here as always. Thank you, Cal, and thank you to everybody for tuning in. Good luck with your lineups for the Honda Classic, and we'll talk to you again next week. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by Number Fire.